Hey guys, GhazzyTV here with another Path of Exile video. In this one, I'm going to talk about my perspective of the state of minions in Path of Exile right now. As you guys know, I do mostly minion-related content and crafting content and helping new and newer players. I do have a ton of non-minion builds as well, and content for non-minion players, obviously. But it's been a large or big focus for me for many, many years now. And minions got kind of hurt in 3.19. Kinda. Oh god. So what's really interesting with the changes that has happened in 3.19 is so drastic to the state of minions that a lot of people deem them not to be playable, but they are still in a decent spot. The problem that has occurred with these changes is that minions have become more and more complex than they already were. And they were already one of the most complex genre of builds in the entire game, where the lack of information and understanding of them is not a common thing in the game. And you can't find out by looking at things in game unless you understand the deep, in-depth mechanics of how the game works. So you had to use third-party tools or guides or asking people that have the experience to learn these things. I guess that's where I come in as a content creator to fill those gaps for people. And that's been, a fun project, but it's also showing more and more after all these years that, when is this information going to be public and when is this going to be made easier for people to grasp? And the reason I'm talking about these things is because the solutions that was implemented to solve the problem the minion builds were having with 3.19 and the current state of them has a lot to do with minion defenses, but also the understanding of how to scale their offensive capabilities. And these things just get worse and worse as we move forward with the current state of the game when it comes to minions themselves. A lot of minion builds have lost so much efficiency with the changes that they're not really good anymore. The very few minion builds that are still performing at an admirable level without too much thinking would be things like our Akali's Fang does very, very well. Don't really have to think much more. If you follow a proper build guide, you'll be fine. But when it comes to pretty much any other minion build, and I will talk about the most effective ones. For example, Absolution has been a very, very big, strong, probably one of the best minion builds during Lake of Calandra, thanks to the Dorian's prototype upgradable paths that you could take with the efficiency of the lake mechanic. That build in itself has the same problem as the other builds that I think within the minion genre that's really good, such as SRS, for example, has done extremely well. Golems are doing all right, and those are basically the top 3 minion builds that actually performs rather well. Solrus was all right as well. I did double check all of these things, and I've triple checked and play tested my low-budget approaches of these things. And a lot of it can be bypassed with enough currency, just like most builds in Path of Exile. If you have a ton of currency, you can bypass a ton of issues by just having more damage output, and suddenly you don't really encounter the issues at hand. However, the vast majority of the player base will not be playing very high budget characters. They will be playing rather low budget characters. And that's where a lot of the issues start to surface, if you will. These surfacing issues mostly stems around the defensive layers, not of your character too much, but more about the minions' survivability. We don't have to go through the whole list of problems with the enemy guardian because they actually did adjust that very well with the arch nemesis modifiers not affecting the minions in that sense, so that's actually good. However, there's a big understanding within the group of people that understands the statistics and how minions scale. A lot of this with the defensive layers is, for example, resistances is very important to understand with minions. The most minions, not all for that matter, which makes this even worse to talk about, but most minions have a baseline resistance state of 40% elemental rest with 20% chaos rest. This is not always accurate with with other minions, but most minions have that. And understanding that, and we all know that minions, well, maybe not all, but minions have the same elemental resistance cap as players, that's 75%. They are unaffected by the reduced resistance that we get for finishing certain act bosses.
Excuse me, did you know that can save you 18 skill points?
Which means that it is very interesting and popular for us to make sure that we get these minions to the cap of 75% elemental resistances. Now, how do we achieve this? Well, let's take an Absolution build, for example. First off, we have on the Necromancer Ascendancy, we have the access of Commander of Darkness, for example. This allows us to get 30% elemental resistances, which brings our baseline 40% of most minions, like zombies, golems, for example, up to 70%, right? And then, you know, if you're playing Guardian, for example, you get 20% elemental resistances to you. This does not affect your minions, but Necromancer does provide this layer. With a new introduction of things like Bone Rings, that has an implicit modifier of providing elemental resistances to your minions, and running the Commander of Darkness from the Necromancer, we're able to get 70% from the Commander Ascendancy node, and then able to get additional percent of resistances from the Bone Ring, which means that you don't need the explicit modifier on these rings that can grant your minions resistances, because the implicit is enough to get to 75%. However, 3.19 Arch Nemesis and everything actually introduced a situation where the 75% elemental resistances was not enough to keep these guys alive. This had a lot to do with the other impact of survivability within minions, where they ended up in a situation where even with capped res and investment to their survivability, such as minion life or other sources such as meat shield support and whatnot, or even level of gems, was just not enough to keep them alive versus certain content, and that's where the problem starts to emerge. So even if you did these investments, a lot of people playing lower budget minion builds had problems keeping the guys alive. And there are solutions to this, and these solutions are presented very well and very well described in high level or very high quality, if you will, build guides. Now, obviously, in the descriptions below the stream, you can check out the guides that I have, that I personally believe that they're, you know, more than enough information there to cover these things. But not everyone does that, and not everyone follows my guides. So the state of the builds the genre builds has become very detrimental because of lack of information and knowledge of how these actually work. And one of the best ways to scale these things is actually to use the Minion Defensive Mastery to give your minions another 8% of max elemental resistances, which brings the 75% capped Ellie res up to 83%. This is still enough for you to run the Commander of Darkness and having one Bone Ring that has to now roll 13% or more to bring that 70% res up to 83%, right? Other sources of defensive stats for permanent minions or minions in general would be to get the Grave Intentions because of the extra chaos rest that your minions would be gaining, as well as the increased life, but also the life as extra energy shield node from Grave Intentions itself. So these nodes are very, very strong, and when it comes to them dying to physical damage or bleed, the only solution is then to spec all the way into Indomitable Army. Obviously, now you have two different sections of cluster nodes on the tree that becomes not really mandatory, but the lower budget your build is, the more attractive these nodes become to keep your minions alive to play the game in a very effective way, whereas the max resistances for a lot of these builds is more or less mandatory for the vast majority of these builds and playstyles, depending on how it's designed. The problem with this obviously comes down to the fact that to get these nodes, you are sacrificing something. These things are not free. You'll end up in a position where you're either sacrificing your own defense, your quality of life, or your minions' damage output to get this. And like I mentioned earlier, the problem with these things is mostly about the lower budget builds, whereas the vast majority of people are playing those type of characters. And if they have to start sacrificing efficiencies to keep these things alive, that causes a big problem, because the higher end don't really need them to that extent, because of the 80% LRS is more or less enough to cover, as your damage or gear will carry the rest of it over. And this creates a really weird situation for the state of minions in the game, which I'm not very happy with. And I think that they've been going a little bit overkill on nerfing it. And I'm not saying that minions should be significantly buffed or anything. All I wish them to do was that they kind of need to make sure that the information about minions would be more easily accessible. Because of the lack of understanding of how it works creates a big problem when it comes to the state of minions. Then again, even on the higher budget versions of these type of builds that tackles these issues, minion builds have very rarely been the meta outside of like Syndicate Operatives times or Mage Skeletons we had for 2 leagues as well, which was still not the most played build in the game, but it was, you know, very high up there. So minions have very rarely been the best thing, but they've always been very good at doing everything, which is why they're very popular. And the genre itself is also very popular. But the current state of minions is very limited. And if you lack the information or knowledge of how to tackle these issues, or if you're not following a high quality build guide, you're going to have problems with it. But if you are following those things, minions are in I would go as far as to say they're in an okay state. But that okay state comes with a prerequisite of understanding these things or following a high quality build guide that explains and elaborates and discusses or provides the information of these issues. So that's my big problem with the state of minions as of now. And I don't want to go in too much in detail when it comes to the Enemy Guardian or the consistent hammering they've done on Spectres for the longest of time. And, you know, I could sit here for hours talking about what I think they should do when it comes to Spectres or even Enemy Guardian. And I know you guys probably have suggestions of what you guys think they should do, but do please let me know in the comments below what you guys think about that. And, yeah, that's basically all I want to talk about, the lack of knowledge and how the state of minions looks right now. They're still very good to play. You can check out the guys that I have. I think SRS, Golems, Absolution, Soulrest, and Arakalis are basically the choices you can run that are very, very good. There's a couple of others, but I think that those are the top choices right now to be played. But that's just my take on the current state of it. I'm not very happy with how minions are looking right now, but I will continue to do my best to make sure that there will be very good mini builds to be played in the coming leagues. And let's see what happens with 320. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think of it, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Till then, stay safe and keep rocking.